interesting philosophical chat today with the old GPT, and wanted to speak about it just briefly. It's all about the Trickster. So I want to talk about the Trickster, and I think even mentioning the name probably summons ideas and archetypes and tropes and the like into your mind, because what brought it up for me was the idea. I've been watching a show called White Collar recently, and it's it's a similar trope and archetype that you see in a lot of shows. There's the good cop, the FBI agent that, for years is chasing down a con man. He eventually catches him, gets him into prison, but through that process, of course, he had to get inside the mind of this character, right? And then eventually, somewhere down the road, they need to come together to work together. So he enlists the con man to help him catch other potentially worse criminals or similar criminals. So to, commute or minimize his sentence, he gets to wear an anklet and tag around FBI agent who put him in prison and assist him catching criminals, because, of course, the con man, the criminal, understands the mind of the people that the good FBI, the just FBI agent is trying to catch. But what's interesting is, of course, with any good show with some decent writing, eventually you see that these just characters eventually get a little bit corrupted, don't they? Little by little, they accommodate, they compromise, and then they rely and depend more and more on these elements such as the trickster, the con man, the convict, the criminal, the lifelong criminal, who is not going to change his stripes, right? He is who he is. Try as he might to fit in and have a normal life, he still requires the basic, the human necessities, the camaraderie, the relationships, the family sort of unit, things that we all require, even though he comes at it from, obviously, the thief, the criminal, the con man perspective, and whatever that backstory may entail. So eventually, FBI agent and con man become good friends, and they both rely on each other. But what I'm speaking to here as the trickster is this element of the con man, this shadowy aspect character that shows up in our lives individually, across a society or culture, and then, of course, across civilization. So the idea, of course, is that the con man, the trickster, didn't corrupt him necessarily. He essentially liberated him by showing him the illusion that he's been living by, right? And, these good cop kind of FBI agent types are already working in an institution, in an industry, a complex that is rife with corruption and, personal motivations and career-minded people that will step over whomever and manipulate whatever to either get their man or get their advancements. You see it in the court systems, and, of course, it's fictionalized on television, but there, of course, has to be some elements of truth, right? Every person that's playing in any level of this justice system, as it were, is human, after all. And they're subject to, corruption, perversions, manipulation, coercion, and, good old money. That's disturbing in a way, because you see how, when they're trying to put someone away, it all comes down to asking questions in the right way by a lawyer or solicitor or defendant, an advocate. If you don't ask in a certain way, then you can't answer it in a certain way, which then, manipulates the jury, as it were, to get your desired outcome. So all these games that are playing, the corruption is everywhere, quite literally from top to bottom in this whole intelligence industrial complex. But the whole idea of the trickster is what interested me, because, of course, this is not a new trope. It's not a new archetype. It's something that exists throughout all of history, mythology, and legend. The idea, of course, is that this trickster element is something that I believe that we, on some level, manifest and attract into our lives for the sake of catalyzing change, catalyzing that personal evolution, that unraveling and that remembrance that I've spoken of several times. Without that shadow mirror aspect that's highlighting and accentuating and bringing to surface these emergent energies that we're trying to suppress, ignore, or set aside for the sake of duty, obligation, protocol, principle, what have you. They're effectively lies, right? We're lying to ourselves about the nature of the system, the nature of reality, the nature of the story, the nature of this realm, where we can't appreciate the grand scope of things without seeing the good and the bad, the black and the white. And as much as we want to pretend perhaps that a lot of these things don't exist, that we might be above that kind of corruption, that we might be better than and aware to these things, that we might be intelligent enough to see through the tricks and the traps, quite often we fall just as easily as anyone else. So I think the point of this trickster, whether it's for the individual or for a culture, a nation, perhaps a civilization, these things manifest to jar us from our complacency and perhaps from our complicity in playing along and getting lost in the script, in the narrative, and forgetting that there's more to this story here. But also, it goes deeper than that. This trickster, or criminal, or the provocateur is necessary for growth. Whether it's a self-initiated thing that we actually provoke and prod ourselves into some sort of training and change and transformation, or it will be thrust upon us. Because that's the point of life here in this earthly realm. We're not meant to be here to sit idly, to simply play out our days in some sort of numb passivity or blissed out dissociation. The point of this place and this life here is contrast and polarity and the endless cycle of renewal, rebuilding, falling, rebuilding, inside and without. So without that provocateur, we will find ourselves in a place of stasis. And I talked previously about distress homeostasis. So homeostasis is kind of the opposite of stasis, right? Stasis is stagnation. It's basically things coming to a standstill, which, as far as human body goes, as far as this avatar works, if we stop, if we laze around, if we idle, we literally atrophy and fall apart. In the simplest terms, you can say that, if you don't use it, you will lose it. And that goes with virtually anything within this system. Again, it's a polarity. For muscles to grow, you have to break them so they regrow stronger. And then you have to repeat that. Otherwise, the process reverses, it atrophies and falls apart. The bones get weaker, all the rest of it. So all of that is to say that we're not simply passive. We're not simply passive players in this realm, in this place. We are participant observers. And we're here for a very short time. So whether or not it's necessary, once we do come to that awareness, we'll have to deal with that dark night of the soul, perhaps, as it were, because you suddenly realize that, or feel perhaps that you've been a pawn, that you've been just pushed around and played by the game, when the whole idea is that it's all a game anyways. And while you may be a pawn, now that you're conscious and aware of it, it restores your agency so that you can be more conscious and aware of the whats and the wheres and the whys and the hows of your day-to-day and how you want to proceed going forward. Let the tricksters and these spiritual adversaries do their job and then take it in stride and understand that that's just part of the game, part of this reality construct. And it's not anything that really applies anywhere else except here, in this life, in this place, because that's the only place it can exist in this manner, right? And through that awareness, through that reclaiming of our authority and our agency, regardless of what the tricksters and the various dimensions of how that plays out may come to pass, you don't lose your center, right? And we can relate back to the idea of this distress homeostasis. How do we address and develop and expand on our capacity for resilience, emotional resilience, spiritual resilience, psychological resilience, and self-reliance in these matters? How do we contend with the fact that reality is not out to get us? It's simply this ongoing mirroring polarity game that only serves us here in this particular kind of living, this kind of life expression on Earth at this time, in this place, in this era. And everything that you're seeing, everything that's coming in as an input from all these different sources that might seem like an endless stream of good versus evil, black versus white, and the seemingly endless conflicts and suffering and struggle, is simply different expressions of the idea of engagement with the story. And to become conscious of that is to release all attachment and to release that identity. And so again, paradoxically, as we have to learn to contend with the paradox of human existence and living in this earthly realm, the trickster serves as an agent of reminding us that we are in a construct, a game, a story, and that there's very little we can affect any control over. So understanding, paraphrase a Garrett Kramer quote, understanding that we're not in control allows us to jump freely into the game of life without fear of outcomes and consequences. The idea being, it's all transient and temporary, and our short lives of, 60, 70, 80, maybe 90 years is a blip in the grand scale of things. And we are never going to figure it all out. We're never going to get it all done. We're never going to finish all of our to-do lists. But that's not the point of it. The point of it is to, dance like no one's watching, sing like no one's listening kind of idea. Because you're a dancer, because you're a singer, because you're that conscious participant observer. You're the awareness behind this machine, this avatar, this expression in the material realm. You're the awareness that will continue and persist and carry on beyond the idea of this linear time construct that exists in this particular realm and only in this particular realm, so that we can experience this linear progression, this linearity that's endemic to the materium. And ideally that should afford us a liberation of freedom, that awareness, so that we can remind ourselves that we are in the world but not of it, right? We're acting, we're playing, we're exploring, and then it'll all be gone. And regardless of how the tricksters play out and what may on the surface seem like conflict and contrast and frustration, consternation, agitation, it's only there to catalyze us toward the next awareness, awakening moment, to serve again, to remind us, remember, in the world, not of it. Here, you're not here for a long time, as the song would go, right? And it's not simply about shirking and forgetting about responsibilities or accountabilities, to each their own kind of thing, depending on your values and priorities. But ultimately, I think it serves us best to keep in mind that it's a grand story. And if we're convinced that it is supposed to be without imbalance and disharmony and disunity, we're deceiving ourselves. The whole point of this place is to express and explore these ideas in the polarity, in the yin, yang, in the left and the right, in that constant cycle of death and renewal. And so the tricksters will show up, whether summoned from within or, again, attracted from without, to poke and prod at our passivity, our complacency, our forgetting, to remind us again, and perhaps even to, jolt us into an aliveness, an awakening, and to re-engage with the game, and to be reminded time and again that polarity, that shadow mirroring is a necessary aspect to life here. And to fully explore life here, we simply release ourselves from those tensions, from those chains, by realizing that we are not in control. We are participant observers, and the awareness behind the player, the awareness within. So to reframe that, we can consider that the trickster is not the enemy. It's simply another aspect of ourselves, an element of the game of life with a specific purpose to broaden our horizons, to awaken us from spiritual slumber and inspire us to evolve or unravel and remember. And once we shake away that blur, that fog of forgetfulness, we can re-engage the game without any undue attachment. We can live life with reckless abandon, as Mr. Kramer would say, without the fear, again, of outcomes and consequences. Because come what may, we will be reminded and given the opportunity time and again to understand that the trickster is not only a threat, but an agent of transformation, an agent of awakening, an agent of catalysm, a catalyst for us moving toward our better knowing, our inherent wisdom, and our greater remembering. These energies are simply another aspect of you, of what you really are, pushing and poking and prodding you to remember, to awaken, and to embrace the awareness. So I guess the idea is that, as with anything, solvitur ambulando, right? It is solved by walking. So when we can accept the idea that the trickster is simply part of the engine, it's built in to this construct. It is a necessary aspect of life here in this place at this time. It's part of us to explore and extrapolate and agitate and agonize, to shake us awake when necessary. And whether it's happening in one lifetime or whether it's a slow drip kind of poison that slowly takes a civilization from perhaps balance and peace and harmony to fragmentation, to upheaval, to chaos. It's part of the natural cycle of things. It's that toroidal sort of expression of birth and death and renewal, which is simply endemic to this construct that we find ourselves in. And so we shouldn't get too stuck on any one moment, on any one outcome, on any one possibility. And we shouldn't get stuck in the fear of potential outcomes and consequences, as we were saying earlier. The trickster has its purpose, and its purpose is to serve you.